Hello, Joel. How are you doing today?
I am fantastic. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so welcome to the Founders Podcast. And before we begin, Joel, I would like to know if do you have a favorite motivational quote, something that motivates, inspires you, you would like to share with our audience?
Sure. This is something that I picked up from a former boss and a mentor of mine who actually changed my life twice, and we can talk about both those opportunities. He told me once, any room that you can get into, you belong in, and that's what I've used to battle imposter syndrome. To be quite honest, so and whenever I find myself speaking in front of people or in a room and I look around and there's a lot of people who I'm like, man, I'm outclassed by these people. Any place that you can get to, you belong.
That is something really, really soothing, Joel. I cannot tell you how many times I have felt or experienced imposter syndrome. And you're spot on that. I can share. So when I was in Oxford, every single time I used to go inside the class, at least for first couple of months, I felt it like, oh my God, these people are super smart. They have accomplished so much in their life, and I'm nobody.
What am
Uh,
I doing here?
well, what am I doing here? And it took me like more than 6 months to realize that okay, it is the exact same process they have all followed to get into this classroom as I did, with the exact same, milestones we have all achieved to get into the room, to become a part of a class, right? So yeah, I can totally relate to it, and thanks for sharing that. So Joe, um, what do you think? What are the top three things our listeners will learn from this episode today?
First one is something that I've spent a lot of time working on. It is, what is happening in that blank stare moment that I think all founders or business people have faced. What's happening when the lights click off in your audience's mind, and how do we turn those blank stares into blank checks, which is what we really want. The second one is elevator pitches. They're dead. And why are elevator pitches dead, and what can we do instead? And then the last one is, how can we decide what to include in our communications and in our messaging? How do we decide what's in and what's out when we have so many things that we want to share? And how do we not overload our audiences, which kind of circles back to the first one in that blank stare moment. So those are kind of the three main things that I always like to share.
Definitely, definitely. Before we start with the point one, I always try to learn more about my guests. Imagine you're, I don't know, 24 years old, just out of college, maybe starting a new business or first job. You swipe right on a dating website or app, and you're going on a date with a person. That person wants that person is eager to learn more about you, right? That this person wants to say like, can you take us back to your roots and share with me about your upbringing, your childhood? How did your early experiences in your childhood is helping you to shape your journey right now you're on?
Oh, wow. So yeah, going way back, my father is a doctor. He's a
Hmm.
military. He was in the Air Force. My mother was always a creative type, always into crafts, always into art. And in fact, in the dedication to my book, I dedicate it to my physician father and my artist mother, among others. So I kind of always had um, this upbringing, not a strict military upbringing, but definitely about being proper and doing things the right way. But I was not that kid. I'm late diagnosed ADHD. Now I've got a son of my own. So reflecting on my childhood, I can see that I really was trying to forge my own path, really following in nobody else's footsteps. So I was a theater kid. I was a punk rock kid. You can't tell by my haircut; it's bald, but I had long green hair at one point in my life. And my background was really in theater. I was very interested in early childhood education and video games. And I had an opportunity to get a job, actually right in the middle of college, and I guess my second sophomore year, if you're counting years. at a video game company doing video game testing. And this was right before the dot-com bubble burst. And I said, this is great. I don't need to finish college. I can get all these certifications. I can become an IT guy. So I went from very creative to IT, and I went from help desks at video games and to NASA. And I said, I don't want to fix people's problems. I want to build computers. So in building computers, building networks, and I worked my way, somehow to becoming an adult, all the way through to working in cybersecurity and being that hardcore nerd. But I got an opportunity early on joining the government. Actually, the mentor I was talking about looked at my resume and said, why are you an IT guy? Why do you want to be I was applying for a compliance position. Why do you want to apply for a compliance position? You've got theater education, video games. You worked for Nickelodeon one summer. You were an early podcaster. You want to be a communications person? So that really spun me off into the world of communications and learning about how people think and learning about how to communicate complex subject matters. And when it all boils down to it, I'm just a nerd that talks good. And my superpower is helping other nerds do the same thing. And we can sort of talk about the rest of that path. But I sort of came out of, my early education and early career thinking that I was going to do the things, and I realized I was much more interested in helping the people who do the things talk about the things that they do.
Interesting. Well, the date is going quite well. I guess you get the next one then. Cool. So let's jump into our first learning then. You mentioned about the Blackster moment. So can you describe to our listeners about a Blackster moment in your own journey, a moment where everything shifted and you realized something critical about your business or yourself? And do you believe these moments can be intentionally cultivated, or are they inherently spontaneous?
Well, I think the blank stare moment is something that most people have experienced. When you're meeting somebody for the first time, and it's generally when you're doing a pitch or when you're communicating with somebody for the first time and they ask you, what do you do? Or they ask you, what are you working on? What are you building? And we have all this pent up excitement and expertise about what we do that we just launch in and overshare. I worked for a long time in the government for cybersecurity people. But my job was to help them craft the briefs or the communications to the people who their brains are already overloaded. They're the executives, they're the decision makers. They don't have time for the introductory lesson of what we were briefing them on. They just needed to get right to the moment. But you spend a lot of time with the preamble, you spend a lot of time with the setup, and then by the time you get to where you really want them to start paying attention, you can just see that their eyes have clicked off, or the light in their eyes have turned out, and that is the blank stare. And the first time I really realized it was the same gentleman who hired me at the government had finished his PhD, left the government, started a cybersecurity company. We're having lunch one day, and he says, I've started this cybersecurity company. It's based on my PhD research. It's amazing, but I'm really having a hard time communicating it to people. And I said, well, give it to me. What is the pitch? And he said, well, it's based on my PhD thesis. It's a self-defending artificial intelligence multinodal network that uses the behavior of eusocial insects. And
I did not understood any word.
And those are definitely words that you're using. And so then our next inclination is to try to dumb down. And he said, well, it's an ant swarm algorithm that's going to tell you where you're going to be hacked next. And I was very intrigued by this. And so I came on as director of communications and marketing to help him figure out how to explain this. And I said, who are you selling this to? Is it the cybersecurity experts, or is it the engineers? Is it those really nerdy people who would want to read a white paper and dig into it? And actually his early marketing funnel, for lack of a better word, was read my PhD thesis, right? Which is nobody's going to read that. I call that selling by white paper. And he says, no, I'm trying to pitch it to boards of directors and risk executives, and I said, man, we have got to come up with a different way of entering this message. And that was kind of the early realization that we overwhelm people because we're passionate, because we have all the data in our heads, we just understand it. It's kind of the curse of knowledge that we hear about, and to give him a little bit of credit. He was speaking to very smart people, and I think when smart people are speaking to other smart people, they think, if my brain operates this way, surely your brain operates that way, and I ought to be able to speak PhD to you because you're a fellow PhD or you've reached a certain level. And, it was an early realization of mine that we still have caveman brains. We still have, we have to overcome the fatigue and the brain overload. And, I talk about in my book about calorie preservation and self-preservation, even when we're sitting in these beautiful executive boardrooms and these meetings, we're still human to human, and we have to find a way of communicating on a human level first before we overwhelm with the deepest topic. And so that is what I've spent the past several years trying to help people crack, is that blank stare moment. And, I kind of cheekily say, you can turn that into a blank check. If you get people excited, if you get people to buy in, if you get people leaning in to want to learn more, they will learn more. And ultimately, you position yourself as an expert. You build that trust and that credibility to the point where you can actually convert people, and they then become an advocate for you. Once they can become a customer, but they can also become an advocate for you, and then the cycle continues, and then they are out there evangelizing for your solution, product, what have you.
Did he manage to finally get them read his PhD thesis?
Oh, it's funny. I included it in the appendix of my book, just kind of as it was a fascinating technology, and the sad truth is we were early to the technology game. We didn't have the data problem cracked. And I actually have some clients, and have had some clients in the past, who are still today trying to do what we were trying to do back then. It was a brilliant concept, but one of the funniest outshoots of that was I actually invented a card game to help explain his thesis in about 40 seconds to use as a sales tool, so that we could dispense with all of the biological swarming and all the boring preamble, and just put the algorithm into people's hands. And that was a big...
I was actually thinking to ask you that, like, how did you, because I did not understand anything when you mentioned about the technology.
And I purposely rattled that off a little quickly, right? Let's be honest with the storytelling here.
So what did you change? What was the end messaging look like after you helped him out?
Well, the other challenge that I find founders have, and this is what we were battling, was the burden of the secret sauce, right? So we felt that our approach, using this biologically inspired swarm technology as the root of our technology, was the cool thing. But what we realized was the cool thing was actually the end result and the output that we had for the customers that we had. And what that was a reduction in their risk exposure and a potential reduction in their financial exposure. And so we were able to translate from very complex mathematics, this is how likely these scenarios are to happen in your environment. And if you fix this one little thing, you would avoid a potentially financially catastrophic risk or whatever. That was the story that people were more interested in. So it was less on the how we were doing and the what we were doing. And so what we ended up doing was designing a card game, actually with the help of my then 8-year-old son, designing a card game that could lay out this concept. And for people who know a little bit about cybersecurity, we use some taxonomies and some frameworks that they would be familiar to, so that we could speak to them on within their context that they understand, sort of tell that story, but then add the cherry on top, which no technology had attempted to do up to that point, and they're still trying to figure it out now. And that was enough to, I say, break people's minds open a little bit, let them experience the technology and the algorithm physically on a table in front of them, understanding what it was, right? So we actually ended up using the cards to teach cybersecurity loss scenario planning at Carnegie Mellon University. We took it to a bunch of conferences. The cards were much more successful than the software. One, because the software was still in development. We were a little ahead of the technology curve. But I think it was also the price point. We were selling these card decks for $12 as opposed to $120,000 software licenses. So, but that opened up something for me, that if you can find a way of taking an abstract concept, putting it in somebody's hands and letting them literally feel it, our brains work differently when we're using what's called kinesthetic learning and tactile. And now I'm getting super duper nerdy, and your listeners are probably like blank staring right now. So
No worries, no worries. Cool. So you kind of tried to communicate the benefit or how the solution worked for your friend in simpler words with the help of a game which you created for them. So okay, I understand that playing a game on a pod might not be a best suitable thing to do to utilize our time. So let's discuss any other examples you have which you could share with our audience. Like, this was the messaging before somebody came to you for the help, and this is what you crafted for them, and what difference it had before and after. And then once it's there, we can move on to the second learning which you mentioned around elevator speech. Yep.
Sure. It would actually be helpful for me to talk a little bit about the new card deck that I have and what I do now. So I designed a card deck that I actually use in my workshops today, and the general thesis of it is, we share too much. So again, going back to that blank stare, we share too much intellectual information before we've engaged somebody's imagination, engaged their heart. And then we don't deliver enough trust towards the end. So the idea is this heart, head, and gut model that I've borrowed from Aristotle. He actually pathos, ethos, and pathos, logos, and ethos. Ugh, maybe I need some more coffee this morning. And I find way too many people opt for the technical first. And so what I have is this card deck, which allows me to prompt people and ask them bigger questions. So instead of, what are you doing? What's your technology? We'll ask, what's something you would like to change about your industry? What's one reason for you and not an alternative? Or what or who do you advocate for? And each of these cards is targeting a different objective: emotion, logic, and credibility. So by going through these prompts in these cards, what we do is I'm actually able to pull out the things that people just assume or go unsaid. So for example, if I'm working with a team and they're like, our marketing is very flat, it sounds like everybody else, it doesn't really show who we are. A lot of the times their inclination is to go to a marketing company and say, just make us look cool. Just come up with some cool visuals. And the marketing company doesn't know them either. Really, they know themselves. So a really good example of this is, I have a company that I'm still working with, but I did this exercise with them about 2 years ago. And their main tagline, or their main slogan, was, our technology, your success. Now, to me, that says very little. It may as well be live, laugh, love on your homepage, right? It doesn't say what they do. It doesn't say how they're different. It doesn't tell me anything about them. In fact, when I Googled our technology, your success, I got 22,000 other web pages on Google. So I showed them, I'm like, the reason this feels really good to you is because it's lazy. And it is, you've seen it so many times and you're just like, yeah, that works. That feels good. But after doing some work with them and doing the exercises, I said, what really is the root of what you guys do? And they said, we just get the job done for our clients. They don't even have to worry about it for us. And I'm like, you can promise a client success and they won't believe it. But if you can say, look, this is what we do, we get the job done. And so we pivoted their marketing away from, the live, laugh, love of SaaS companies and technology companies. And we really got down to, get the job done. They had a lot of culture that wasn't being presented on their website, which we got into their website. And then what I ended up doing was building for them a messaging platform that was kind of like a cheat sheet for everybody in the company that is like, hey, these are the main things you need to know about us. And it's not a marketing guide. There's way too many companies that give you like here's your PDF, here's your logo, here's your taglines. It's surface level, but it's not something that the people who day to day need to communicate on behalf of the company can dig their teeth into and can actually adopt and use, because most of it comes from the top down. It doesn't come from the staff or the people. So what I do is help them build sort of that bottom up messaging through this prompting of another company that I'm working with, and it's innovate, collaborate, accelerate. I'm like, it says nothing. It's three verbs. Again, live, laugh, love, and I think it's because when people start thinking about their marketing, they flip off their heart, they flip off their gut, and they become very analytical. What should I say? What is everybody else out there saying? I've got to fit in. So I help people really discover through the prompting and through some of the exercises that I take them through, the stuff that really is them. And the whole process is, there's a workshop where I'm throwing those cards out. I'm prompting people. They're writing their answers down on note cards. No discussion, because most creative meetings turn into a debate club. I have an idea. No, you don't. I have an idea. Back and forth, back and forth. So what I do is called parallel processing. I'm just having them write their ideas down on cards, and then collectively we can take a step back and say, look, you have 400 different things that you could say. Now, collectively as a group, let's cluster them, group them together, look for the common theme. So like 9 times out of 10, there's something in there, and it's a little like tarot reading, but as a consultant, that's my prerogative to say, hey, out of the 400 different cards on the table, there is a real cluster here, or a center of gravity around this topic. Have you ever used that with any of your marketing? And again, 9 times out of 10, they'll say, we had no idea. We were all thinking the same thing. That really encapsulates us. And I say, well, then let's pick that gold nugget up, polish it up, and put it on a pedestal, and make that your big idea, and everything else flows from that. And once you unlock that big idea, it becomes a whole lot easier to see where your gaps and opportunities are to communicate what your real core messages are and your differentiators.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that, because you made it super clear that there's no formula or blueprint as such, because it's specific for specific use cases. So just to close down the topic of having these Blackster moments in founders' life, what would be your suggestion before we move on to the next topic?
I would say, and it fits into the other topics as well, you have to understand what you want people to walk away with. You have to have an agenda for every interaction, for every piece of copy that you put on your website, for every piece of collateral that you put out, if you're doing a pitch deck, every slide has to have an objective. And it's not the information that you're delivering on the slide or in the content, it's the takeaway. And if you're like, I don't know whether this is contributing or confusing or taking away from my larger objective, you need to be able to decide what's in and what's out, which gets sort of more to the third point we'll talk about.
Sure thing. Great stuff. Cool. So let's move to the next topic then. You mentioned about the elevator pitches are dead. Now let me share something. We have these communities around in London where we go, and then we have mics given to the founders. founders usually go on the stage. It's not a stage, it's like it's a bar, but that because the whole bar is booked for this event, people just stand around a particular place, which is like have light and a mic in the hand, and then they have like 60 seconds to pitch their ideas for the fellow founders, as well as if there are any VCs or angel investors available. Most of the time what happens is the fellow founders who have been working or owning a business, if they're interested in the idea, they kind of contact to this new idea founder, and then they try to either help them out or invest into their businesses, right? I do understand that the elevator pitches concept as such is dead now, because what I have personally realized is if I am pitching, I never say that this is the investment we're looking for. The whole point of my pitching is to gain a meeting with a potential investor, to understand if they can even show a little bit of interest into the idea. And then after that, it goes to multiple meetings, potentially a workshop and things like that before we get a check. What's your kind of like direction of navigation towards like what would be a replacement for elevator pitch if you think they're dead?
Well, first of all, if you think about the model or the mental model of an elevator pitch, it's a hostage negotiation. I'm going to lock you in a metal box for 45 seconds until I rattle off these 5 to 7 bullets that I've very carefully rehearsed. And I hope to God one of these is interesting to you so that you will remember me when we walk away from this elevator. So it's a very, just the thought of it is a very restrictive, hostile engagement. Now there is value to being rehearsed and being well thought out and being able to, if you're on the spot, deliver certain bits of information. But it's the very rehearsed, very structured way that I think people need to get away from. You need to know yourself well enough that you trust yourself to be able to evaluate the situation that you're in and pick out the one or two things that are going to get people interested. And there, again, it's less important what you're doing and how you're doing something, and more important what's in it for the person you're talking to, right? So if they're an investor, they're not probably, unless they're an investor who's in the market, also in the market. Like if they're a pure investor, they're very uninterested in the problem space. They're interested in the upside. You need to be able to clock that very quickly and understand it, right? So you do need to understand, hey, if this is a financial pitch opportunity, I want to be able to talk about how big the problem is, not what it is, and how small my risk is and how big the upside is. Right? That's a dynamic story that you can tell. If I'm speaking to a potential customer, then it's a similar story, but it's like, how much does this hurt them personally? That's the heart, right? Just enough information to let them realize that, okay, there really is there's something, and we should talk later. That's it. And you have to be able to be dynamic. So one of the cards on my deck is actually the cocktail party. I would much rather people be comfortable in introducing their solution like a cocktail party, which is back to that dating model, which is actually a really good way of looking at this. So many people are like, this is me, this is me, this is me, let me tell you about me. Very few people listen first and try to look for what is my in. What is the thing about this person that I can relate to? So it's much more valuable in my mind to have your arsenal of things that you want to say prepared. So preparation is important, but not to be over rehearsed, and just to say, what do I know about Ash? Maybe I want to introduce you to a friend of mine at a cocktail party. So you're into jazz piano. I know that Sally over here spent many years at a piano conservatory. I'd love to introduce you guys because you have this in common. That's the same approach that we should take with our pitches, with our introductions. And again, it goes kind of back up to that pyramid model that I've sort of alluded to, of the higher level emotional hooks at the top and less in the dark, meaty, white paper, thesis stuff, which is what you need to lead people to, but you never get them there on the first date, on the first meeting, in the first pitch. So don't feel that you are under pressure to deliver everything in that first interaction, which is what an elevator pitch is. An elevator pitch it's worse than a pitch competition. It's so targeted. So I say, forget the elevator pitch. What's one thing that makes me memorable? I know the ones that you're talking about. I went to one recently, and it was a very long pitch night. There were a lot of people going. I think they had 20 or 30 people. The very last person to get up there was an Australian gentleman. And he says, I know I only have 30 seconds, but the first thing I want to let you guys know is, ladies, I'm single. And everybody laughed. And so he used some of his time to endear himself to the audience. And then he went into his he's a doctor, so he knew what he was talking about, but it wasn't over rehearsed. And he was like, this is what we're breaking, this is the paradigm we're breaking, this is the problem. And I'm looking right now for people who can be early adopters or introductions. That was kind of the level of the pitch competition. And during the networking session afterwards, he was mobbed. Now, it could have something to do with the fact that he was the last person to speak, but we were all tired by the end of that. I mean, everybody who was there from a mentorship perspective or from an investor perspective, I could tell that it was later in the evening and we had 20 or 30 people present, and we were like, thank God it's the last person. And he was the best pitch of the night. He used his opportunity. He took his moment. He didn't take himself too seriously, I think is kind of what I'm getting to. And I'm pretty sure he didn't go home alone that night either. I'm just saying.
Well, the last time I oh my God, it's been so long. I have been for a date because I've been with my partner for a while now, and I still remember that every time I used to go for dating, because I'm a straight person, I used to date ladies, and every single lady I dated, they were always looking for somebody funny. Even though the dating concept is not for you being, laughing and having fun. It's more about knowing each other, understanding if this is going to work, and then if there is any kind of compatibility. And it tells you so straightforward on your face that even though you have zero compatibility with the person who's sitting across the table, your lives are drastically different. You are in a different economical spectrum, but if you can make each other laugh,
Yes.
that is such a big secret formula or something like that in the dating world.
It's a form of vulnerability, which I think is missing a lot in business, because especially in cybersecurity, which is where a lot of my clients are, they want to present themselves as infallible and perfect. And, we can give you 360-degree protection. And, we know when we're watching a movie or when we meet one of those people who comes off as just so perfect, it's unbelievable. And so that is where I think approaching somebody from a human perspective, being vulnerable, humor is very important. I think a lot of companies are starting to latch on to that, and they're almost overdoing it. They're doing this, brand personality is a little bit too far. But if you're able to present, there's a card in my card deck which is about bruises. It's one of the story cards, and it's like you should be able to share, especially if you're a founder, some of your failures. and say, I tried this, I tried this, I tried this. It didn't work. It wasn't until we tried what we're on now that it really worked, because it shows to the person you're presenting to, they know what doesn't work. They've fallen down. They've had some learnings. There's a lot of people who were like, my first year of college, I had this great idea and I went with it. And I'm like, oh, great. So you don't have any experience. You haven't shown that vulnerability. And so I think, humor is a great way of, sharing, especially if it's a way of building empathy and saying, hey, look, have you guys tried X? It didn't work, did it? Have you guys tried Y? Here's one we tried Y, and it failed miserably. Have you guys tried Z? You haven't. That's what we're working on now, and it's had yada, yada, yada. Then you need to show some of the wins and the proof points. But what you've done is you've gotten them nodding their head, and you're going, man, they get me. They understand me. They've tried the same stuff I've tried. They're just like me. And that is just like dating. It's sharing stories about your development and your upbringing and being vulnerable. And I think in business, not enough founders want to show that part. They don't want to show that they have failed. And some of the best founders that I have spoken to are on enterprise 2, 3. They maybe had an exit or a partial exit, but it's the ones who take learnings. And being able to share that, it would be a great thing to use in one of those cocktail party introductions. What are you guys trying? Oh yeah, when we tried that, XYZ happened. This was our result. This is the result we're getting now. Oh no, really? I'm leaning in to learn more. So, it's confidence, it's humility, and that's a balance that we have to strike.
Totally agree on you on that. So just before we move on to our third topic, which is, around how to craft your messaging as a founder, what would you say as a closing remark for if somebody's thinking about their elevator pitch, or they're thinking about to go outside and raise funds, and they're doing it with all the strategies you have to implement? For example, create a funnel. Top of the funnel, you have to inform your investors, and then potentially slowly roll down and become a investor into your startup. What would you suggest, very briefly, to our founders or listeners to utilize as a strategy, as a formula, as a blueprint, instead of doing elevator pitch?
I think it's okay if you have an elevator pitch to go with it, right? And I would say do it in a lot of places that are low risk, and rehearse it. Yes, have it rehearsed, have it prepared, but pay attention as you're delivering it to when people lean in, where people ask questions, and make notes, because those are the things, those are, again, kind of like the workshop that I do. Those are those nuggets that stand out to people, that people remember. When you get your rejections, and there will be many, ask for feedback, ask for, what didn't you hear? What was I missing? Was there something you didn't agree with? And when some of the best learnings are, again, in that failure. And so you have to have a lot of failures, but they have to be low risk. And keep notes, keep, your little notes of what works and what doesn't, revisit them. So that's kind of one of the processes in my workshop and using my cards, which is you have to always be critical, self-critical. And I find a lot of people are just like, that didn't work, throw it away. Well, maybe there's a different way of saying one point. So you have to figure out a way to pivot. So keeping notes, keeping track, watching how you evolve, figuring out the things that don't change, because those will eventually become your North Stars, your first principles messaging. And then understanding that maybe that person that you pitched, or that audience member, that wasn't your market. They weren't for you.
Yeah. Great stuff. Well, thanks, Joel, for that. Let's move on to the third one. And I want to give you a heads up. I'm going to be a little bit selfish here. I know I am sitting with a superior personality who understand the messaging quite deeply, have been in the industry for a very long time, and understand how to craft the messaging. Most of our listeners, actually around 28% of our listeners, are into tech. They are producing tech-based product. They're creating either software as a service or licensed softwares to sell it to B2B, B2C markets. And they're all looking to understand if there are kind of like cues or formula or something in place which they can utilize to craft their messaging. For example, I've been running a couple of podcasts from this one is around 3 years old now. The other one is just a year old. This one has already been gone through 15 seasons. So we are recording the 15th season now. The other one, we are gone to second season, quite a lot of streaming and everything. But it takes a lot of time to host, organize all these things, get to know people like yourself. And don't take me wrong, I feel super lucky to be connected through the internet with so much talent around the world and successful people with so many amazing stories. In order to solve this problem, I've been working upon this small project. It's just a side hustle. This is a very small project I've created. The reason I've created is, the saying we have, eat your own dog's food, right? So I have been using HubSpot to gain people's understanding of like what kind of people I want as a guest on my show. I used to use Calendly for scheduling meeting. Then I used MailChimp to send emails to market the podcast, Trustpilot to capture the feedbacks, Shopify to sell merch for the podcast, all these kind of things, right? And I realized that I've been using them, paying all these subscription, but I'm not using them 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Then I stopped and then started communicating it with my growth hacker partner. And then she said to me, why don't you create a platform for just yourself, like a solopreneur, and use it? And I said, that's too much work. I said, well, if it works for you, then it's good. If it doesn't, then it's fine. You just learn something. So we started building this. And now this platform actually replaces all of this in just one place, because what we did is we created it based on, component approach. So everything you see in the front end is actually available here. If I come to you tomorrow and then say, Joel, I want to now sell it as a service, do you think this messaging is correct? And sorry for being selfish here.
No, I love this. In fact, I would love to do one of the card exercises with you. We can do a little mini workshop based on this messaging. It's perfect. So the headline the tagline at the top: run your entire business from one dashboard, built for solopreneurs. As a solopreneur myself, who is in the same position you're in, you immediately have my attention, right? And I'm a huge HubSpot fan. I've used MailChimp and all those other platforms that you're talking about. I think all the time, I'm like, am I getting my full value out of it? Right. And so I'm always like, oh, maybe I'll build it myself. That's what we do as solopreneurs. And, in the same position, just sharing the story that you were sharing, you're like, do I even have the time to set aside to build my own thing? Or should I I was immediately thinking, find somebody who has been in the same position that I've been in, who's done this, and is not one of the big behemoths, and see what they've done. So I love that immediately. What I would do is challenge you, and why don't we go through a very mini message deck workshop of your content? Maybe I'll share my I'll just do my window up here. So the basic approach and my model and platform, in addition to the emotion, logic, and credibility, is to not to rip off Aristotle. I also borrowed from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and so we have the very heavy technical details that I alluded to at the bottom, kind of high density, low emotion, but moving up towards the top, I want you to have a big idea, one, maybe two, a couple stories, which you had a phenomenal story that you shared with. know, you've already demonstrated the value proposition in reducing your tech stack. So, but getting down into some of these other things, that's where the challenge is. So what I'll do is I will throw a couple cards at you, ask you for your feedback, and luckily we're recording this, so you can look back on it. Again, this works really well in bulk. It works when you have multiple cards thrown at you, or you have a team who are answering and giving you a lot of ideas to sort of look at holistically. But let's just step through the stack and see
Sure.
what you come up with. I want to
Sure.
see if your authentic, off the cuff answer is what you've written down on your website. So, what is something that you would like to change about your industry, or the problem set that your product is solving for?
So I think in podcasting, the most painful exercise is having getting guests on your shows which are relevant to your industry of your podcast niche, understanding if they could add value into the podcast, because ultimately you have to make sure that each episode adds plenty of value for the listeners. So I think that's having access to good value adding guests on the show, having access to them, and having all these scheduling and communication challenges solved would be the primary one.
That. How about this one then? Who are you advocating for? What or who is this platform trying to solve for? You can't solve for everybody. Who's your
Mostly
niche?
podcasters, because I know the pain they are going through. People who actually go through every day with their through their calendars, through their CRMs, and understand, oh my God, I'm spending so much time just to even get somebody on the show. So podcasters, yeah, that would be my answer.
So I'd push back. Now, again, this is just one card, but I'd push back on your headline. Is it solopreneurs, or is it for podcast solopreneurs? Are you building, is it a business that you're running? Are you running a business off a platform, or are you running your podcast business? And again, there would be some back and forth and some discussion, but I would say from a big idea perspective, it's the problem that you're facing is doing a podcast is hard enough. Finding the people and doing the follow through. Can you do that all from one platform? And obviously we'd find a better way of explaining that. From a story perspective, and you did share some of your stories, where did you fail before? And how did you overcome it? What was the thing in this new platform you're building that this is the way to do it, because these other ways didn't work? And you already did kind of share that one. Let me look for another one. This one is actually a very good one. Something that from a SaaS and software perspective, we don't often share. What's the onboarding experience like? How hard is it? I've got to shut down all of these other platforms. I know this is what your listeners would be thinking. I've got to pivot out of all these platforms into this new one. How much time is that going to take me? What's that onboarding experience like? Is that a story that you can tell?
I think I haven't actually evaluated it properly, because
early times, yeah.
Early times. And I think that's going to be somewhere around at least a week long, because if you're already running a business, if you're already running a podcast, there's a lot of activities involved into your day-to-day life, and you have to unplug small parts of it and slowly move into this platform. And that's why I made sure that when I started talking about it to my friends and colleagues who actually do a lot of podcasting, one of them actually mentioned to me that instead of putting a monthly subscription for the whole platform, what you should do is actually create it based on what they want, because not everybody is looking for an e-commerce platform or a course creation plugin or a sales funnel. They're just there for CRM, scheduling meeting and email marketing. So why to charge them for anything else, which is exactly the problem I was facing. I was paying for all these softwares without utilizing their 100% value. So I said, wow, that sounds really good, because then the person who wants to use specific services just choose and then pays for it, compared to the person who wants to use the e-commerce platform as well as the funnel builder as well as the course creation, because that person is making more money, so they're more than happy to pay you more. Whereas the person who is not making money from these, they're just starting up, why to charge them more?
Absolutely. And so then the story that you can tell there is, and this is I think I do have a card in here called the villain, which is like, what is the name, putting a name to the bad guy or the thing that in the industry that people don't like to talk about. And, we really call that like rip and replace anxiety. I don't want to have to tear everything down and build everything new. So if you can have a platform that you can transition to as you take on more capabilities, if you could actually show that your overall costs go down, you might be paying you a little bit more, but you're saving. So it's like, look, as you move over here, your overall costs come down. That can combat that rip and replace anxiety, I would say. Not to prompt you for these, because again, it's early times, but I would challenge you to understand that there are differences in a value proposition from a tangible value proposition to an intangible value proposition. And one of the things that I take my clients through is, you may have metrics, but are there other ways to tell that metric that might be a little bit softer? A lot of people don't believe numbers, but they'll believe stories from people. So for example, if you were able to say, I'm going to reduce your workload by 46%. Oh, that's nice. If I'm financially minded, I might like that. But if I can say, if I can actually get a client or a success story, so again, using a third party proof, some of that trust transference to say, I no longer have to double staff my shifts or whatever. Reducing a shift by no longer having double staff and a 46% reduction in workforce are the same thing, but you're presenting it differently. So I would say it's not softening the number, it's turning the number into a story. It's turning the number into a different type of value proposition. So as you start to find those successes and those wins, write them down, keep them in one place. That's what I advocate with my clients, is to actually build a platform that is your go-to, where you keep all those little nuggets and statistics and testimonials, but do some work to say, is there another way that I can say this? Time to value or value to time are two different ways of telling the same story, but it depends on what your audience wants to hear. Do they want speed or do they want cost? So,
Definitely. And then sometimes it has to be a balance of both.
And it's a balance, exactly. The next two levels are the mantra, which is kind of your stories that you tell yourself. So like, what headlines pop into your head? What phrase do you find yourself repeating often? And most importantly, can you link those up to things that you hear from your customers often? So you're a podcaster, you've been a podcaster, you probably curse under your breath and say things like, why did I book that person? That person wasn't a great match for me. Well, I guarantee, because I'm a podcaster myself, nerds that talk good, I've been in the same place. Why did I take that meeting with that person? It sounded good up front, but I don't really think that was the right match for me. So if you can find that your audience is saying the same thing under their breath or subconsciously or even out loud that you're saying, that could become a tagline or a headline or something. And then, the last are, this kind of goes in line with value propositions, are your metrics. So again, numbers, tangibles and intangibles, and then third-party proofs. Anything you can get somebody else to say about you is automatically worth 100 times better than you could say. And then the last at the bottom are technical details, of which there are many, many, many different prompts. But what they do is they prepare you for the things that your audience is asking themselves that you're not prepared for. So we all know, what does it do? How does it cost? How does it work? We all come prepared for that. But there are things like, how does your solution bring efficiency or speed? What are the steps to implement? Where else do you plug in? So this is a great one because you want to show that you have a cross adoption platform. So do you plug into some of those other platforms that you're competing against that you can eventually usurp? So there are a lot of different things. So the card deck is designed to prompt you as an entrepreneur for the things that your audience may be asking or needing to hear that you don't think about because you're so focused on building your solution. So that was a very rapid fire quick run because I know we're running out of time, but that's
No,
the things that we do.
yeah, no, this is really eye opening because that pushes me to think deeper around my customers' requirements, and that's why it's effective. So thanks for that. So Joe, as you know, we have one more section on our pod, which is called the lightning round. We have got 6 quick fire question for you. At any stage you think you don't want to answer any of these questions, you can give me a skip, and then we can move on to the next one. How does that sound?
That sounds fantastic. I put you under the gun with the cards. It's only fair that you turn it back on me.
Don't worry about it. I have got a big one. Great stuff. Number 1, what are the top 3 strategies to craft your messaging in 2025 in a better way?
I think slow down. I
Mhm.
think look at what other people are saying. It's important to fit in before you try to stand out. And then I think write things down. So many people try to shoot from the hip. And that's what I try to advocate. Slow down, understand the marketplace, and do the self-work. That's why I call what I do therapy almost.
Yeah. Yeah. What book do you think you would recommend to our audience, and why?
Oh, I'm a really big fan. Well, for one thing, I have a book, Be a Nerd That Talks Good. I would not recommend that as a starter. I really enjoyed the Walter Isaacson biography of Steve Jobs, just because it shows we put Steve Jobs on a pedestal, and it really humanizes him and shows where a lot of his influences come from. And that has been a great source of inspiration for me. So definitely the Steve Jobs biography, if you haven't already read it.
Perfect. I'm gonna put that into my reading list, into my Kindle, and reach.
It's a good read.
It's a good read. Great. Thanks for that. One attribute or characteristic in your mind of a successful founder?
Tenacity. Just not giving up, not being knocked down. I mean, I have, definitely had a very circuitous life. And again, taking learnings from failures and not giving up. I think tenacity is one of the biggest ones. But also knowing when to walk away from a bad bet.
Interesting. What's your favorite personal productivity tool or habit?
Oh, it's card decks. I collect them ever since I designed that first one. I buy a card deck almost everywhere I go. I'm a huge fan of Brian Eno Oblique Strategies, which is a card deck that's been around since the 60s, 70s, and all it is just different ways of thinking. What mistakes did you make the last time? Emphasize the differences. I keep cards with me all the time because it's an outside voice that's forcing me to think.
Indeed, indeed. What's a new or a crazy business idea you would love to pursue if you had time?
Oh, that's a great one. I think I'll skip on that one because I have some ideas and I want to keep them in my pocket.
Okay, that's your choice. Totally.
I don't want to give it away to all the other founders out there.
There you go. I totally understand. Although a lot of people share their ideas, and some of the founders say, "Oh, this sounds good." It's more about execution. We all know that, but yeah, whatever you choose to do. What's an interesting or fun fact about you that most people don't know?
Boy, I play the didgeridoo. Not well. And it's a bit of a long story, but I accidentally won a didgeridoo on the internet many, many years ago.
Mm.
It's beautifully carved, and I have this thing, and I'm like, I should learn how to play it. So I've spent the last several years trying to teach myself. I'm not good at it, but I use it for meditation. It's a deep breathing technique for me.
Nice. I've never heard about this instrument before in my life. So,
It's an Aboriginal Australian long hollow tree branch.
mm,
You would recognize it the moment you heard it.
cool, cool. Well, yeah, I would love to. I'll search for it on YouTube then. Great stuff. So, Joel, thank you so much for joining me and sharing all these strategies, tips with our listeners. If people want to get in touch with you, people want to understand more about you, people want to ask you a question, or they want to read the book, what's the best way to reach out to you?
Best way to find me is my vanity domain, which is nerdthattalksgood.com. I have the book listed there. I have the cards. I offer a free 15-minute message therapy session to kind of get you thinking and point you in the right direction. And I have my own podcast, Nerds That Talk Good, where I bring on just great thinkers, people in scientific communities who are doing interesting things with the communication end of the doing. So again, it's less on the doing side and more on the talking about doing. But yeah, Nerd That Talks Good. You can pretty much find me anywhere on most of the social platforms.
Great, Joel. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your inspiring journey and the impactful work you're doing by helping others understanding how to, craft their message. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on Founders Podcast.
Thanks so much, Ash. Thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure for me too.